Greetings, friends. You are on the Military Summary FC channel. Today, we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 27th of October 2025. A large number of very important events took place today, so let us proceed. Today, Zelensky stated that over the next 8 to 12 days, he and his European partners will develop and present to the public a certain plan, a plan for the peaceful resolution of the conflict. However, Zelensky, anticipating the outcome, added that this plan will most likely be rejected by the Russian Federation, and Putin is unlikely to agree to it or proceed with it. It is, in principle, not surprising why the Western countries and Zelensky are rushing to put forth at least some kind of plan, at least some sort of peaceful settlement. The fact is that, evidently, within those same 8 to 12 days, the most important and, shall we say, pivotal events will occur, both on the territory of the Kupiansk agglomeration and on the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. That is to say, the spine of the AFU's defense will be definitively broken during this same period. It is possible that these territories will not be completely cleared within 12 days, but that will then be only a matter of time, perhaps 5 to 7 days after it happens. I would like to remind you that yesterday, at a meeting with the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov informed Putin that 2 cauldrons have been formed at present. One is in the vicinity of the city of Kupiansk, on the territory of the Kupiansk agglomeration, and the second is on the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. And today, the Ministry of Defense supplemented the picture. 1 day has passed, so to speak, since the official announcement of the creation of the 2 cauldrons. And today, the Ministry of Defense supplemented the picture. Probably, in the coming days, the Ministry of Defense will provide updates on the state of affairs in both the Kupiansk and Pokrovsk areas on a daily basis. Let us now focus in more detail on the situation as of October 27th. Kupiansk Krasnoarmiysk axis. The Ministry of Defense reports that the destruction of the surrounded groupings of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, AFU, in Kupiansk and Krasnoarmiysk continues. In Kupiansk, 4 attempts by Ukrainian formations to break out of the encirclement ring onto the right bank of the Oskil River across the destroyed crossings in the Petrovka area were suppressed. As a result of the fire damage inflicted by artillery and unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, up to 50 servicemen of the Armed Forces of Ukraine and 6 units of military equipment were destroyed, including 2 Humvee armored vehicles. That is concerning the Kupiansk agglomeration. In Krasnoarmiysk, assault groups of the Second Army are conducting active offensive operations to expand the control zone in the area of the railway station. Over the course of the day, over 60 Ukrainian servicemen, 2 armored fighting vehicles, and 3 automobiles were destroyed. We observe that the Ukrainian side is currently attempting to break out of the encirclement, and we observe that this is happening in small groups, apparently along the entire Oskil River. Today, pro-Russian sources are also publishing video materials where we can observe the process of the attempted breakout itself. In these frames, we see a Russian UAV flying toward a Ukrainian vehicle attempting to cross the Oskil River to the right, to the western bank. However, the vehicle is destroyed as soon as it is detected. Slightly further north, in the area of the Kupiansk junction, another episode was published by Russian sources. Here, we can observe an analogous picture. A Russian UAV flies over destroyed crossings, spots a Ukrainian vehicle, and immediately launches a strike against it. Thus, we see that 2 attempts by the AFU to break out of the encirclement have failed. The equipment was destroyed. The next 10 to 12 days will be crucial. But I would like to draw your attention to the fact that, according to the Ministry of Defense, 5,000 personnel were encircled in the Kupiansk direction. If we use the simplest figures published by the Ministry of Defense, then by the end of October 27th, there are no longer 5,000 inches the cauldron. There are already 4,950. We understand that the AFU grouping in this sector will melt away. It will melt away before our eyes. And such a defeat could unequivocally lead to unpredictable consequences for Zelensky. Pokrovsk axis. Next, we move to the Pokrovsk sector of the front and will continue this topic. Once again, 5,500 personnel were encircled on the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. This is what the map looks like today, by the end of October 27th. There are many gray zones, many understandable territories. Let us go into everything in more detail. We will start by looking at the map as of the end of October 26th, at the moment when the General Staff announced the creation of the Pokrovsk cauldron. This is what the map looked like yesterday. Today, we are making a number of adjustments in the west, in the northeast, and in the southeast. Now, let's proceed in order. We will start with the northeastern outskirts. Today, a number of pro-Russian experts report that the armed forces of the Russian Federation, AFRF, have secured a foothold in the northeastern part of the settlement of Myrnohrad and continue to develop the offensive in the northern part of the city. Information is also being received that fighting continues in the southern part of Myrnohrad. Russian units have approached the citadel, the southern citadel of Myrnohrad, a micro-district where the largest number of high-rise buildings is located. Combat operations continue here. The Russian army is rapidly advancing. However, these two changes on the map were made exclusively based on publications from various more or less reliable sources. Regarding the situation in the west, the map, as you can see, has been adjusted in favor of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. This adjustment was made primarily based on video material published by the 7th Air Assault Corps of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. This material contains a large number of episodes showing Ukrainian UAVs striking Russian units and their positions. And one of the strikes was geolocated in the northwestern part of Pokrovsk at exactly this point. That is, the strike targeted this specific position. Based on this footage, we are coloring in almost the entire northwestern industrial part of the settlement of Pokrovsk. At present, the distance between the advanced positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the northwestern part of Pokrovsk and the southern positions south of the city of Rodynske is already less than 5.5 kilometers. Concerning Rodynske, it is a separate issue. Despite the fact that video material with Russian soldiers raising the flag in its southeastern part was published yesterday, the Ministry of Defense has not yet confirmed full control over this city, even though this territory is already completely colored in the gray zone based on publications from various sources, stating that the city has come under the full control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. We are awaiting these adjustments, awaiting this information. It may be announced or published in the near future. But the question of why the Ministry of Defense is delaying these news updates, if this is indeed the case, can apparently be answered by the situation unfolding slightly further northeast of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. For the third day in a row, the Ukrainian side has been counterattacking in this direction. I remind you that this counteroffensive began with the aim of deblocking Rodynske, restoring control over Rodynske, and consequently, restoring supply and restoring all roads towards Myrnohrad and Pokrovsk. Combat operations in the Rodynske area are not actually deciding the fate of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. That fate is already predetermined. What is being decided now in the Rodynske area is whether Ukraine, whether Zelensky, will manage to withdraw 5,500 soldiers from the encirclement. But again, the Ministry of Defense stated today that 60 are definitely not going to exit. So the conversation is no longer about 5,500, it is about at least 5,440 soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine who are also melting away here before our eyes. And what is happening? Yesterday, Zelensky launched a counterstrike, as a result of which the Ukrainian side first managed to restore partial control over Suketsky. Next, the Ukrainian side managed to wedge between Vilna and Novoshakovo. Information is further being received that the Ukrainian army managed to advance even further from Suketsky toward the settlement of Zatishok. Heavy meeting engagement combat operations are currently underway for Zatishok. Information is also being received that Ukrainian units managed to restore control over Novoshakovo and also advance between Vilna and Suketsky. That is, attempts at a counteroffensive are underway, with the aim of pushing Russian units back to the Shakov-Fedorovka-Novoturetsky line. The Russian side is well aware of this situation and understands that the fate of the AFU contingents on the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration is now being decided by the situation in the area of Rodynske and Shakov along this line. Therefore, the Russian side is offering fierce resistance here. And, of course, the most important thing to always pay attention to, the Russian side is currently on the defensive here, fending off the onslaughts of the armed forces of Ukraine. One thing is clear from this situation. Ukraine is paying a very high price for the unblocking of Pokrovsk, and it is not certain that this will ultimately happen. Well, we will monitor the developing situation. Military operations, as well as the advance, will surely develop here in geometric progression. Therefore, the numbers will be even higher tomorrow. And tomorrow, we await new adjustments and new areas colored on the map. Slightly west of the city of Pokrovsk, information is being received that the armed forces of the Russian Federation have managed to advance north from Udakny and completely clear the Pokrovska mine area. This territory is actually a crucial strategic facility where more or less significant forces can be concentrated. And from this mine, the Russian army can move further north towards Serhivka, as well as towards the M30 highway, attempting to bypass the settlement of Hryshyn from the southwest. Russian units will surely take advantage of the current situation and will press the Ukrainian formations to also prevent the transfer of additional reserves to stabilize the situation in Pokrovsk. Zaporizhia axis. Next, we move to the Zaporizhia sector of the front, from where the most significant news comes today, after Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, of course. Today, the Vostok group of forces reported that during combat operations, they managed to clear 3 settlements at once. As you can see, there are a large number of adjustments on the map. It is reported that Russian troops managed to clear Yehorivka, Privilne, and also Novomykolaivka. Let's look at everything in detail. This is the video material published today by the Vostok group of forces, and in these frames, we can observe how the combat operations unfolded in this sector. We see artillery strikes, FAB strikes, and the clearing of the area using UAVs. And in the last seconds of this video material, we can see Russian soldiers raising the Russian tricolor in various parts of all 3 settlements. One of the flags was raised on the territory of Yehorivka, 2 more flags were raised on the territory of the settlement of Privilne, or even 3 flags, and 2 more flags were raised on the territory of the settlement of Novomykolaivka. Based on this video material, we made an adjustment to the map, coloring a fairly large area. Of everything we have just discussed from this video material, perhaps the most important is the clearing of Novomykolaivka, which is located in the southern part of the Uspanivka fortified area, and, most importantly, on the Ukrainian side of the Yankul River. Now, from these positions, the Russian army can advance south, toward the fortified areas in the vicinity of Novospanivka, as well as toward Uspanivka itself, and begin combat operations for the last strongpoint in this sector, for the Uspanivka fortified area. Also, in the near future, we expect the offensive to develop toward the settlements of Rybne and Krasnoarmiysk. This is a fairly logical development of the current situation. And, of course, Yehorivka. The situation here is also very interesting. From the territory of this village, Russian units can begin to move toward Danilivka. This is a settlement located, as you can see, along the T-585 road. If the Russian army manages to take control of Danilivka, which is located on the Russian side of the Yankul River, then from that moment, the logistics between Pokrovsk and Huliaipol will be significantly disrupted. And apparently, we should expect such a movement in the near future, but probably only after the clearing of the settlements of Vishnev and Sihilm. Today, pro-Ukrainian cartographers are making very large adjustments to their maps. As you can see, they are making adjustments regarding both control and the gray zone. Currently, a large part of the settlement of Vishnev is already in the gray zone, which indicates that Russian units are already present on the territory of this town. Moreover, the gray zone has been expanded to Novoaleksandrivka. That is, we see that this line of defense of the armed forces of Ukraine has either collapsed or is approaching that situation. Slightly further north, footage is being published today from the territory of the settlement of Vodolaska. In these frames, we can observe how, during reconnaissance activities, the Russian army manages to identify a temporary deployment point, apparently of the 67th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and after these positions were discovered, strikes are launched against them using Iskander missiles. These frames capture several strikes on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. Very high casualties among the personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine from the 67th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine are reported. Liman axis. Next, we will move to the Lyman sector of the front, from where many important news updates are also coming. There are no actual adjustments on this sector today, but separate very important, reliable sources, who apparently possess fairly truthful information about the state of affairs in this direction, report that Russian troops managed today to physically cut the Yampil-Lyman highway. That is, this road today came under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. We are conditionally marking the territory that came under the control of Russian units on the map. It is possible that the physical cutting of the road occurred somewhere else, but the fact remains. Today, Lyman, Yampil, and Siversk were officially severed from the general logistics network. Now, all logistics pass over a wider shoulder, which can certainly lead to quite significant problems. And that is all, dear friends. The Military Summary FC channel reminds you that we condemn all violence in the world and call on all sides to begin immediate negotiations and resolve all problems through diplomatic means. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, give us your likes, and all the best to you.